Since it's now 2014, now it is a time for new beginning and fresh starts, I thought I would start off this year with a story about new beginnings, fresh starts, and mass genocide. That's right, folks. I'm going to talk about the flood. Yay! This particular portion of the biblical story of Noah's flood is going to cover, I guess you would call it, the pre-flood. Things that we can find in the history and of the Bible and other writings. Pretty much anything that doesn't have to do with the actual flood itself. We're going to start this off with a simple question. Is this story divinely inspired? Is this story that a man was warned of a flood, told to build a really big boat, gather all kinds of animals, family and loved ones, to get onto a boat, and then it was going to rain? A giant, huge flood came, killing everyone, eventually landing on top of a mountain and sending out birds to see that when it's dry. And then when it is dry, you sacrifice some animals because it has a sweet smell. Is that really inspired? If you do, that means you believe that it is divinely inspired by the great god Anu, the Babylonian god depicted in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The earliest known verified writings of the 11 tablets that made up the Epic of Gilgamesh have been dated around 2700 BC. However, many Christians believe that Moses, seen here wielding an awesome stone tablet of lightning power, wrote the first 5 books of the Bible around 1400 BC. However, the main consensus of historians, biblical scholars, biblical linguists, and archaeologists dictate that the composition of the first 5 books of the Bible averaged around 900 to 600 BC. However, if we granted the 1300 BC composition of the first 5 books of the Bible, then we still have a 1400-year gap between the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Genesis story. It is safe to assume that the Babylonians came up with the story first, as the early Israelites were a splinter group of the early Canaanites, which the Babylonians had been in control over for quite some time. To make a long story short, archaeological and historical records have shown that the emergence of the early Israelite tribes came from the collapse of the Canaanite culture. Early Israelites did not come from outside Canaan, they came from within. There was no exodus from Egypt. To put it bluntly, the Israelites were Babylonians. At this point, I could really just stop right here. Archaeological and written records have shown the source of this Noah's flood, and it's obviously not from God, but from the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh. So, why do I keep going? Who knows? Maybe I just want to suffer a little bit. As I was making this video, I came across something I'd never noticed before. I read Genesis 9, and I knew about the time when Noah, after about a year of sitting in a boat with animals for so long, got drunk off his ass and, sat there lying naked. Now, if I was Noah and I had just gone through that, I'd probably do it too. But as we read in Genesis 9, Ham, one of Noah's sons, sees his father naked on the ground, and then goes and runs and tells his brother, "Oh my God, Dad's naked!" The other brothers are like, "Well, let's cover him up, damn it!" So then Noah wakes up and figures out what happened, then he gets pissed at Ham. "Oh my God, you looked at me naked. You're cursed. I'm cursing you and your family, and you'll all be slaves." When you stop and think about it, that just seems like a stupid curse. And who's going to abide by that? Like, oh, okay, I guess all my family and all my loved ones and everyone, all of my descendants from now on shall be slaves to my brothers because my dad told me so. Really? Now, it seems silly to think that that would be in the Bible. However, it does make sense if you apply this to context. Basically, after this fall of Canaan, the Israelites took them in as slaves. They couldn't afford to live on their own, and the Israelites took them in, or you can call it indentured servitude, but as we see, they didn't get really treated very well. So as generations passed on and people wondered why they were enslaved and why we had Canaanite slaves, Well, it's because there was a flood and because of a curse from Noah, so it's your great-great-great-great-grandfather's fault. This is a perfect example to show why this story is not divinely inspired, but borrowed from a previous culture and then also used to endorse slavery. Now, Genesis 6, verse 1, "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took their wives of all which they chose." I always like this scripture because it kind of is just a little jab in that whole Jesus is the Son of God thing, when all of the angels were apparently the Son of God, you know? But then, of course, it made me wonder, angels are supposed to be these non-corporeal beings, that they're supernatural beings. How did they have sex with women? And like, why did they have the thoughts that they wanted to have sex with women? Aren't they supposed to be up in heaven praising and worshiping God and doing all this stuff? Like, didn't God design them a little bit better than that? I mean, considering that the earth has only been around, maybe what is that, 1,000 years possibly, because this is before Noah, and Adam to Noah is 16, so I'm saying before Noah or whatever. Like, how long do you have to be around before you get bored with heaven? You know? But I digress. Upon a little bit more study, I found that there's quite a few different arguments that people are making, especially during the 1st and 3rd centuries. Some were saying that it could have been the sons of nobles, like, so apparently some people, again, I guess, made themselves similar to kings, and then somehow they produced giants, like they were metaphorical giants, possibly. And there was also one popular one where the sons of Adam was Seth, one of, the original Adam, his son Seth. They stayed up in the mountain, and they came down from the mountain, and apparently they had super seed because they had stayed virgins their entire life, and then they came down and chose whatever woman and had sex, and their super seed is what produced giants. That was apparently a popular theory back in the day. So who knows? But there seems to be quite a a lot of theories and a lot of examples of what it could possibly be. But yeah, oh well. I just found that interesting. Verse 3, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man, for that he is also flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. Now, most creationists will tend to go, oh, that's God giving out the death threat that he's going to destroy the world in 120 years. So Noah has 120 years. No, that's actually not what that phrase actually means. I've actually asked a lot of Jewish historians and rabbis and, the Jewish, these are the guys that wrote the damn thing. They seem to be well understanding of what's going on. It is actually, what he's trying to say is that they're going to minimize their age, their life expectancy, to 120 years. This is actually kind of enforced with a lot of the Jewish history. The Jewish, there's this saying of, may you live to be 120. The original purpose was to show that God was, saying that the spirit, the flesh, being a man of flesh, his spirit's not going to last that long inside the flesh. It is not a 120-year death threat. Besides, really, God's pissed because all the people are doing anything, and he's just floating around, sitting in heaven like, man, I'm so mad at these people because they're not doing what I said. They all forgot about me. So I'm going to give them 120 years to straighten themselves up, and I'm not going to tell them that I'm mad. I'm just going to make them figure it out on their own. So if they don't, then I'm going to kill them all. Really? This is further enforced in Deuteronomy 34, verse 7, when it says, And Moses was 120 years old when he died, and his eyes were not dim, nor his natural force abated. Basically, he was saying that God basically just kind of took him out. He was like, 120 years, just like I said. Time to go, Moses. He wasn't weak, he wasn't old or feeble, he was just done. That was it. He was out. Time to go. Now, some people say, oh, well, there's people that lived over 120 in the Bible. And that's absolutely correct. There's quite a few references to that. However, if you're aware of anything about the documentary hypothesis, that it was written by 5 different authors, J, E, D, P, and R. I believe it was J that actually wrote this particular, the 120 years. And then it was another author that actually wrote these other lives of people that existed before that went beyond 120. So originally, when this was written, that was supposed to be it, 120 years, though, but somebody else came in later and changed it up. So yes, this is further verification that Noah did not have 120 years to build his ark. Now, I briefly alluded to the documentary hypothesis, but Genesis 7 and Genesis 8 about the flood is a great example of why we assume that it was written by five different authors. We can look, actually, you can see that in Genesis 7 and Genesis 8, we actually see what seems like 2 different authors telling 2 different stories based on the same event. And by that, example of that would be, if we look into Genesis 7, we see 40 days, 40 nights, and then a little bit later we have 150 days, and then it gets into the 7th month, which is supposed to be during the recession of the floods, but then right immediately in verse 6, it says, at the end of the 40 days. Well, that's very odd, because 40 days was like really early on, like verse 2 or verse 3. That 40 days was already accounted for. Why is that there? What does that possibly mean? There was no other reference to 40 days other than that. And it was stuck in 7 months into the flood. It doesn't make sense. However, it does make sense if you take the time and you read Genesis 7, verse 10, verse 12, verse 17 through 20, 22 to 23, and then you jump to chapter 8, verse 3, verse 6, verse 8 through 13, and then verse 20 through 22. If you simply just read that there, you'll actually get just the story of Noah's flood, of the 40 days and 40 nights. The author J is the one that wrote, primarily the Noah's flood, and he had no concept for this 150 days and all that. It was a simple 40 days, 40 nights of rain. The author P came in much later, I think about 200 years later, and actually added a whole lot more dates, a lot more time, for one reason or another. Now, they have verified this by studying linguistics, studying the verbiage, the words, what words were popular at the time, or the usage, or how it was the hand style writing, a lot of different sources and things like that. So, again, this is just another example of how we know this was not really divine, nothing straight from God, just the stories of man that should not be taken literally. And then there's that little matter that I feel like I've been lied to for a long damn time about Noah's flood. And what I mean is that, Christians tend to tout it out as this, Noah was building the boat because God told him that the flood was coming, and then the people were laughing and scoffing at him and his beliefs, and he's sitting there going, no, I mean it, the flood's coming, you need to come on the boat, I promise it'll be safe. The problem is, that's never actually said. There is nothing in the Genesis story that talks about this. Not a single person comes up to Noah and, he tries to defend himself. Doesn't happen. God specifically says it's only going to be him and, his family. I personally find the idea that Noah was getting scoffed and laughed at kind of ridiculous on a few levels. For one, Adam, right, 900 years old, he died only like 100 years before Noah was born. There was only about 5 generations of people that existed before Noah did, all directly from Adam. Now, there wasn't that many people. Yes, they had sons and daughters, and many of them probably weren't named. But surely there wasn't that many, and enough people were around that most potentially had seen Adam, or at least seen his dad. Like, there's probably like second-hand witness accounts of what's going on. Because surely, even after several hundred years, when there's only that many people, somebody is still telling the fact that their granddad was created from dust, from the creator of the universe. Surely, it hasn't been like 50, 100 generations to where nobody's even heard of it. These people are like, yeah, I knew him. I met him. He's like, back when I was little, I met Adam. He was right there. They didn't travel out that far. Secondly, even if they didn't, let's just assume that Adam was just way far off into another country or something, and somehow they just lost touch. But when those animals, the thousands of animals that started showing up by the boat, and they had never seen these creatures before, dinosaurs even, just like, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? And all of a sudden, if I was one of them people, you're like, oh, shit, okay, that, he might be onto something. That, oh, damn. All right, hold on. You got room, right? You got room? Oh, fuck. Seriously? Do you not think that even if people were scoffing at him, that eventually they would have changed their mind? Then you still have Christians, though, making these claims that it's an allegory and, make sure you're prepared for the flood. Well, actually, no, because if you're supposed to be Noah in this allegory, then it doesn't matter what I can do, because God has already said you're the one that's going to make it on the boat, not me. Now, this one's kind of new to me, and this may be new to you. In Genesis 4 and Genesis 5, we see the genealogies of Cain and Seth, respectively. In Genesis 4, we see, that he gave birth to his son Enoch and named the city after him, blah, blah, blah. Cain, so we have Cain, then Enoch, and Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begot Mahael, and Mahael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech. Now, some of these names should sound familiar. We have Seth, which is the son of Adam, which is introduced at the end of verse 4 and in verse 5. We have Seth, who begets Enosh, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, and Lamech. Some of those names are overlapping. Why is that? Why? Well, did they really not have that many names to choose from, that they had to use the same ones? So how does this happen? How do two different people have different sons with similar names, very close, and some of them the exact same name, and end up both at Lamech to be Noah's father? And we don't even, it doesn't make sense. What happened? Well, it was two different authors. Jay was basically describing everything through Cain, because Cain was the only surviving son. But this second author, which seemingly unknown, actually tried to go through the genealogy through Seth. Now, who the hell is Seth? If he hasn't been, actually the redactor asked that same question. So he actually had to write in Seth to existence to explain where Seth came from. If there's anybody that has not been familiar with the documentary hypothesis, and this is your first time hearing it, or you're sort of fresh to it, this is kind of a tough thing to swallow. But if this isn't multiple authors, there's a lot of explaining that needs to be done. So what did we learn today, class? We learned that the Genesis story for Noah's flood was written way after the Epic of Gilgamesh by about 1400 years, even giving the conservative Christians estimate. We learned that the early Israelites only came about from after the fall of the Canaanite settlement, which came about from the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonians were the ones that created the Epic of Gilgamesh 1400 years before the Genesis creation story was even a twinkle in the Israelites' eyes. So we know that obviously the flood story is not accurate. Also, on that note, people say all these other flood stories have gone through all the different countries. Well, if that's all true, if all these countries have some kind of flood story, then how are all of these other countries around? Surely, if there was a worldwide flood, there would be like one people that would have that story wrapped up because everyone else would be dead. And then some of you Christians could be like, well, no, well, they changed their mind, but it was too late. But it didn't fucking matter because God had already said ahead of time who was going to get on the boat. So even if they had changed their mind in time, which I'm pretty sure if this really happened, some people would have, way before the floods, it wouldn't have mattered. They'd have been screwed anyways. And then we learned that since we can find the secular roots to this story, we can see that how it is used to justify and endorse slavery against the Canaanites in the Levitical law, which is what established that Levitical laws, their treatment about slavery was based on that Canaanite bad blood, apparently. Then we also learned about the fact that the authors J and P, two different authors in Genesis 7 and Genesis 8, were actually telling two different stories, well, two of the same stories, but two different ways, and we see the results of those stories mixing up and certain numbers and things not making sense if read back to back. Then we learned that it's really freaking low odds that these people would scoff at Noah because the man that was the original creation, the original man of the universe, was alive, you know, a little bit before that. Most of those people were alive while that man was likely alive. It seems odd that nobody would remember that. They would just forget that and just go off and do their own thing so quickly and forget about God. And then even if that was the case, surely when those animals would have showed up, they would have changed their mind pretty fucking quick. And then we learned that it's a pretty shitty allegorical story too, so quit fucking saying it, because I'm fucking tired of hearing it. So that is the end of part 1 for my refutation for Noah's flood. The next part, I'm not even sure what it's going to be on, but it's definitely going to be a lot more sciencey and numbers and shit, so be prepared for that. But I hope that this was interesting to you guys. This is the Atheist Chef signing off. Peace.